Hello ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Top Hat here. If you're a long time viewer of this channel, you will be aware that I am a console connoisseur who owns a plethora of platforms. There is a place in my heart for many a machine, no matter how much of a hard time some of them get online. In terms of hardware, few systems seem to generate the level of hatred that the Nintendo Virtual Boy seems to pick up. It feels like everyone has an opinion on this thing, despite very few people actually owning one in the first place. The majority of views regarding this system are often second and third hand, in many cases simply built off of the back of online content consumed. So taking this into account, a fair portion of negativity surrounding said hardware is clearly hyperbole that has been spread around by members of the public who have never even owned a Virtual Boy in their life. Due to this online echo chamber, there is a fair bit of fake news around that is often masqueraded as fact, and many people in the past have written the Virtual Boy off without even ever having a go. I cannot tell you how many times I have seen the Virtual Boy placed on worst console of all time lists by the likes of Watch Mojo, BuzzFeed etc. in articles probably not even written by gamers to start with. Keeping all of this in mind, as someone who has now owned a system for a number of years, I thought it was about time I started dispelling some of the myths surrounding the system and sharing with you some of my first-hand experiences with this mishandled hardware. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the history of the Virtual Boy, and an exploration as to whether or not you have all been lied to. Yeah! In 2003, I spent a great deal of time playing WarioWare Inc., a game that was celebrating Nintendo's rich history in an era before it was common. In some of this micro-game madness, built around classic Nintendo games, there were a few red and black titles I had never come across before, leaving me to ponder what such games were. More light would be shed on this mystery for me in 2008, when the angry video game nerd James Rolfe took a satirical look at the platform. While as expected, he roasted the hardware itself, rather surprisingly in the video, he still had a fair amount of praise for the games. This video instantly grabbed my curiosity, and going forward I needed to experience this hardware for myself. Upon doing some research, I would quickly learn that the reason as to why I was not familiar with the Virtual Boy was simply because the platform had never seen a release in my region, due to the device selling terribly elsewhere. With regards to the original release of the system, it came to exist following a sequence of events dating back to 1985. That year, Massachusetts-based Reflection Technology Incorporated developed red LED eyepiece display technology called Scanned Linear Array. Moving forward, they used the tech to create a stereoscopic head tracking prototype called the Private Eye, which featured a tank game. To acquire more funding to improve this technology, they would demonstrate it to Mattel, Hasbro and Sega, all of which declined in fear of motion sickness. Father of the Game Boy, Gunpei Yokoi of Nintendo expressed an interest though. Gunpei was a fan of the technology, as he felt making games of such a style would be tough for the competition to emulate, and it would enhance Nintendo's reputation for innovation. From here, an exclusive agreement was signed with Reflection Technology Incorporated to license their technology so that Nintendo could commence work on Project VR32. The Virtual Boy would remain in development for 4 full years, with the design prioritising both affordability and being manufactured in such a way that playing it would not result in motion sickness. Yokoi kept the red LEDs to keep the system cheap, and regardless of costings, coloured LCDs caused jumpy images in tests anyway. Rather interestingly, despite being designed with the same form factor as a VR headset, the motion tracking created by Reflection Technology was completely dropped from the product. This was due to ongoing concerns about motion sickness and the risk of developing lazy eye conditions. To top it off, releasing a device containing the feature would have been too high risk under Japan's new Product Liability Act of 1995 anyway, which we shall talk about more soon. The new head-mounted goggle design was made into a stationary, heavy and precision steel shielded tabletop form due to recommendations from the Shepens Eye Research Institute, who felt that this would be the safest way children could game on this 3D device. In regards to the graphics the Virtual Boy displays, Gunpei Yokoi states, "Colour graphics give people the impression that the game is high-tech. But just because a game has a beautiful display does not mean the game is fun to play. Red uses less battery and red is easier to recognise. That is why red is used for traffic lights." In early 1995, tech demos of games were surfacing at trade shows, and with the previous huge successes of the Game & Watch, Game Boy, NES and Super Nintendo, Nintendo boldly revealed to the press that they predicted the Virtual Boy would easily sell 3 million units in just Japan in the first year, along with another 14 million software sales. Nintendo thought they had a gold mine as usual. Nintendo had promised some pretty big things for the system. They told the New York Times in 1994 that the Virtual Boy would totally immerse players in their own private universe, despite never acknowledging the system's limitations or discussing any actual games. When the system finally hit the market, despite being built partially around cutting costs, the Virtual Boy was still significantly more expensive than the Nintendo Game Boy. But aside from the impressive 3D effects, the Virtual Boy's graphics were not up there with the Super Nintendo. So the Virtual Boy needed to be positioned as a third pillar, as it did not offer the benefits of either of Nintendo's other main systems. Hilariously, Design News described the Virtual Boy as the logical evolution of the Viewmaster 3D image viewer, which to be fair is a fairly accurate description. The system came packed in North America with Mario Tennis, but never hit the market until after the Sony PlayStation, 3DO and Sega Saturn, all platforms that offered very impressive graphics for the time, with way more mainstream appeal than the Virtual Boy's red and black imagery. In North America, Nintendo predicted that by the end of 1995 they would easily shift to 1.5 million units. However, they never even managed to get 350,000 Virtual Boys into American gamers' hands. Speaking of poor sales, this would result in GamePro and a number of other publications regularly placing the Virtual Boy in multiple top 10 worst selling game consoles of all time lists. But this is one of the multiple lies I am dispelling in this video. Because if you know anything about gaming, you will know there are plenty of very rare, poor selling systems that sold so badly that most of the public are not even aware the consoles existed in the first place. You would be hard pressed to find a Nintendo fan though in 2021 who, as at the very least, has not heard of the platform. Shifting only 770,000 units in its lifetime, for a Nintendo console, the Virtual Boy sold very poorly. But it was far from the worst selling console ever. In fact, it is not even the worst selling Nintendo platform ever. That honour goes to the Nintendo 64 DD, so I am glad to dispel this fake news at least. To put it simply, in many ways the Virtual Boy did not really stand a chance, as apart from the fact that many Nintendo fans were waiting for the Nintendo 64, as mentioned earlier, there were much more exciting other new systems on the market directing attention away from the platform. Further to this, Nintendo's lead game designer Shigeru Miyamoto had little to nothing to do with any Virtual Boy software. So there was not one title developed for the Virtual Boy that Nintendo gave full attention to. To add to all of this, rather alarmingly, according to David Sheff's book Game Over, the system by Yokoi that originally used scanned linear array technology had been repeatedly scaled back during development, but was released in an unrefined final form due to Nintendo pushing it to the market so that they could focus all development resources going forward on just the Nintendo 64. So taking all of this into account, it is no surprise it all went wrong and that Nintendo chose to withdraw it from the market in just one short year. But again, holding this information, is the system and its library of games as bad as many of the naysayers say? Let's explore all of this further. Back in 2016, I was fortunate enough to go on a massive 3-month-long road trip across 25 states in America. On my trip, I visited game stores up and down the country, eventually finding a lovely Virtual Boy in Chicago to call my own. During my early hands-on experience with the device, I made the ludicrous decision to spend some time playing it at the edge of the Grand Canyon, in the hope that I may be the first man in history to do so. When I got back to England, I made some time to play it at Colchester Castle too, so if I was not the first man to play it at the Grand Canyon, I am almost definitely the only man in history to play it at both the Grand Canyon and at Colchester Castle. After many years of waiting, I finally had a Virtual Boy to call my own. When it comes to the echo chamber surrounding the device, one thing I can confirm to be 100% true is how uncomfortable the hardware can be to play for long durations. The goggles on legs gimmick simply does not work, as the only way to play it really is sitting at a desk or table, and even then you have to hunch your back and hold your neck in a very specific position to be able to play it. This is in my opinion by far the most annoying aspect of the Virtual Boy. But what about the headaches? We always hear people talking about that on the internet. What was it about the Virtual Boy that made many consumers fear that the console would induce headaches, sickness and even damage eyesight? This all goes back to the Japanese Product Liability Act once more. According to Toshima Makino, the man who wrote Yokoi's biography, he mentions that hardware manuals in general suddenly had to mention a whole list of things that users shouldn't do with them. Sometimes these were quite silly, things like don't dry a wet cat using this microwave. If an act was not specifically prohibited in the manual, the company would be responsible for the damage. It was a very strict law. This would make the Virtual Boy sound very ominous to some, so it is not surprising that so many rumours quickly began to circulate around the system. This would even result in Nintendo implementing a timer into the Virtual Boy that reminded users every 15 minutes to pause and rest their eyes. This same reminder was also printed in manuals and was placed in them due to this brand new bureaucracy. Yokoi stated the people who brought the product had no idea about the provisions of the Product Liability Act, and so when they read the instructions, they got the image that this product was bad for their health. In 2021, the majority of us have had plenty of experience by now using products that display 3D. From 3D televisions, some smartphones, to even Nintendo's own 3DS range. You will be aware that to this day all of these products display cautionary information with regards to how long you should be using the 3D features. The Virtual Boy was no different to any of these, but due to the new Liability Act and the fact that 3D technology was fairly uncommon at the time, the Virtual Boy was wrongly labelled as dangerous or headache inducing. But apart from perhaps giving you a crooked neck, it is no more dangerous than any other device that displays a sort of 3D. So the headache thing caused by looking at the screen is most certainly a stupid myth, much like when people claim it's one of the worst selling systems ever. As you'll be aware, not many games were published in the short year the console was on the market for. But another lie that was spread over the years is that the console is missing all the big Nintendo IPs due to the system's failings. But the truth is, most were never intended for the Virtual Boy to begin with. The system is often criticised for not featuring key licenses. What may come as a massive shock though to those who only listen to the echo chamber is that the president of Nintendo at the time, Yamauchi, put in a request to de-emphasise Mario along with other key franchises' presence on the system. This was also supported further by Miyamoto himself, who also agreed with said notion. Within Nintendo, a lot of people strongly felt that the Virtual Boy would only appeal to a certain crowd of die-hard players. Therefore, the system needed completely different games to those that existed on other Nintendo consoles. Virtual Boy games were intended to be very different than those on other platforms. On top of this, Nintendo purposely chose to hold back their biggest IPs to maximise the impact of them resurfacing on the Nintendo 64 in subsequent years. This is one of the primary reasons why Miyamoto was so against it. Therefore, even if the console was a success, we probably would not have got many key new entries in established series on the platform. This meant that valuable IPs such as Mario would only make token appearances on Yokoi's new hardware instead, meaning we got games like Mario Clash and Mario Tennis rather than, say, a new Mario World game. Nintendo simply did not want us to have a real Mario experience using a Virtual Boy. To try and make the Virtual Boy work, Yokoi was forced to rely on new game concepts developed internally by his Research and Development 1 department and subcontractors' Intelligent Systems. There would be time squeezes and a lot of pressure from upper management, which would result in a lot of shortcuts being taken when creating the library of games for the system. This would mean that apart from a lack of big franchises being present on the hardware, Yokoi's software team would also be forced to shoehorn lots of established 2D gameplay techniques onto the stereoscopic 3D system, thus meaning the majority of games never took full advantage of the gimmick the Virtual Boy was capable of. So the third myth we have busted today is the reason as to why the Virtual Boy does not have many big brand games. The Virtual Boy never lacked big games because it failed because there was never any intention to add big games to its library in the first place. Speaking of the lack of big games, Shigeru Miyamoto sheds further light on Nintendo's own website as to why he did not support the idea of the Virtual Boy receiving traditional releases. Miyamoto states,
"The complicated thing is that 3D graphics were a major theme for both Virtual Boy and Nintendo 64. Things may have turned out differently if the two devices shared their technology, but they had different purposes. If you think of the N64 as made to confront 3D head on, Virtual Boy was using different technology to aim at enjoyment of 3D without rushing in. I thought of Virtual Boy as a fun toy, the kind of toy to get you excited and make you think, this is what we can do now. I imagined it as something that people who were on the lookout for new entertainment or who could afford to spend a bit of money could buy and enjoy, even if the price was a little expensive. But the world treated it like a successor to the Game Boy system. It even got the word boy in its name. That was also true within Nintendo. Our sales department treated the Virtual Boy as an extension of our licensing business. In other words, we sold it as something like the Famicom. Virtual Boy was an appealing toy. To people who viewed it like that, I think that it is still an appealing product, but when you think of it as a gaming platform, it becomes a failure. I thought that it could be enjoyed plenty enough if there were about 5 really good games. The most ideal scenario would have been for things from there to catch on to the point where it would be its own market. I thought we needed to treat it like a niche product. It's not so much that the machine itself was wrong as a product, but we were wrong in how we portrayed it. That's why I think it would have been most ideal if it first started out as a toy and then organically evolved to a gaming platform. However, ever since Famicom, people tend to think of Nintendo machines as game consoles.
As for the games that are available on the system, while the library is very small, consisting of only 22 games, out of what was released for the platform there is still a fair few gems that are certainly worth your time. I do not recall anyone ever denying that Virtual Boy Wario Land is not fantastic. Unlike many of Nintendo's key characters, he was not created by Miyamoto, but instead first featured in a game produced by Gunpei Yokoi. This made it fair game to give him a proper installment on the system. In my opinion, Virtual Boy Wario Land is one of the finest in the Wario Land series, as it features the same Mario-like platforming and treasure hunting as the Game Boy original, where the rest of the series kind of took a different path, making Wario invincible, completely mixing up the gameplay in future entries. Virtual Boy Wario Land uses the old progression style that is largely based on Mario's adventures, which to be fair is exactly how I like my Wario Land. We then have a completely new license, just like President Yamauchi wanted for the Virtual Boy, a punch-out like boxing game featuring Rock'em Sock'em style robots. The game is even played from a first-person perspective, which to be fair is how most Virtual Boy games should have functioned in the first place. Teller a Boxer is a nice entry. Further to this we have Jack Brothers, a game by Atlus, which is a spin-off of the Megami Tensei series. The game plays from a Legend of Zelda-like top-down perspective, as you make your way through areas consisting of a number of floors, defeating enemies by using character-specific attacks, and collecting keys to be able to advance to the next floor. While the game does not particularly do much to take advantage of the Virtual Boy's main gimmick, the game is solid regardless. These 3 are my particular favourites, but that does not mean the likes of Mario Tennis, Mario Clash, Vertical Force and others are not worth your playtime either. People may laugh at the pitiful amount of games available on the Virtual Boy, but the truth is, hilariously, the platform offers more exclusives that are worth your time than the likes of the Microsoft Xbox One. And that is a system people actually purchased anyway, even though it never even had its own library of games. So once again, it is a massive lie if you ever hear from anyone that the Virtual Boy's games are not worth playing. The titles have never been ported to anything, and considering the stereoscopic technology the Virtual Boy featured, this is still really the only true way they are worth playing. Another great thing about the Virtual Boy, which I feel many people completely overlook, particularly the big YouTube channels and online journalists, is the Virtual Boy's future, and its continued existence after Nintendo pulled support for the device. The website and forum for Planet Virtual Boy has kept the system alive over the years, with the site documenting 72 different homebrew games that have been released for the device. Now, considering that to play Virtual Boy games properly, you need to do it on real hardware really, the community has catered for that too, as in 2007 the Flash Boy was released, a flash cart for the Virtual Boy. Personally, I own the 2010 sequel known as the Flash Boy Plus, a cart that was developed specifically to spur development for Nintendo's original stereoscopic system, featuring a new backup battery and a full 16 megabit of memory, enough to fit any one of the system's 22 commercially released games, along with many of the homebrew games too. As of now, devices like this can be purchased so that gamers can download and store the entire official Virtual Boy library on just one cartridge, thus meaning to play all the games, players are no longer forced to search for obscurities on eBay. So all the classics can be enjoyed, as well as many of the experimental homebrew games too. Speaking of homebrew, I am fortunate enough to own a physical copy of the most impressive homebrew Virtual Boy game of all, Hyper Fighting, a full-blown port of Street Fighter 2 Turbo, featuring 12 playable characters, adjustable speed, and a survival mode. This is the rare sought-after crown jewel of the Virtual Boy homebrew scene, and is even compatible with the fan-made Virtual Boy link cable, a device that links two Virtual Boys together, so that unlike any other Virtual Boy games, this game can be experienced in versus mode. The game is arguably more impressive than any official releases. The game is the largest Virtual Boy game pack ever, so big in fact it needed a custom cartridge, as the game took up too much memory to even fit on my Flash Boy cart. From what I've seen online these days, I've seen people recently emulating the games too, using Oculus devices. But from what I've seen, the experiences look pretty different to what the Virtual Boy brought to the table, as obviously Virtual Boy games were not VR. Through all of this, I hope you see that there is more to the Virtual Boy than you may think, particularly if you scratch beneath the surface through all of the noise surrounding the device and its commercial failings. So before we close today, let's just clarify a few points. The Virtual Boy may not have been a success, but it is far from one of the worst selling consoles of all time. Therefore, there are enough second-hand units out there for most enthusiasts to get their hands on. The Virtual Boy performed nowhere near as badly as clickbait articles may try and tell you. Secondly, while the device can give you a sore neck through sitting funny, the 3D game display is no more dangerous than that featured on the Nintendo 3DS. However, you don't see people spreading rumours about that platform. Thirdly, the system does not lack Nintendo's key licenses due to a lack of success. The system never intended to have many of Nintendo's main series entries on the platform in the first place, and this would not likely have changed whether the system was a commercial success or not. It was intended to be something very different. Fourthly, while there are only 22 commercial games available on the hardware, if we bring homebrew into the equation, we are approaching a library closer to the 100 mark, with some of the most impressive Virtual Boy games only seeing release recently. The system offers way more unique experiences than that of the Xbox One, a point that is not even possible to argue, yet the platform seems to get even more flack. All in all, over the years, the lies and misconceptions surrounding the Virtual Boy seem to have spiralled out of control. But in an internet land where most people get their info through second-hand experience, and in a culture where websites release content to maximise clicks, none of this is surprising really at all. Going forward, all I ask of you is next time you see someone slating the Virtual Boy, try and find out whether that person has actually ever owned one themselves, or whether they are just regurgitating garbage they heard through watching Watch Mojo or something. I strongly advise anyone with even a mild interest in this device to try it out for themselves, as even to this day it remains extremely unique, features a fun little library, with hopefully more homebrew fun arriving down the line. The Virtual Boy certainly has more upside than it is ever given credit for. So, ladies and gentlemen, that was the true history of the Virtual Boy, and a dispelling of many of the misconceptions surrounding said device. If you like this video, you may want to check out a video I made in 2019, where I gave a first-hand perspective of owning a Philips CDI. There are perhaps even more myths surrounding that device than our pair of lovable red goggles on legs. I upload multiple videos covering gaming history every week, so if you're new here, be sure to hit that subscribe button and let me know how you found my content down below. Videos like this are only possible due to the wonderful people who back this small channel on Patreon, help me work full time on YouTube even through difficult winter months like now, where advertising revenue is worth next to nothing. I try my best to give back to these great people by giving all backers of $5 a month or more one extra weekly video. So if you want even more content, and more importantly want to help ensure this channel's future, be sure to back me on Patreon and I will love you long time. Speaking of patrons, thank yous go out to Sebastian Velez, Carl Johnson, The Murder of Crows, Heo, Paula Lopez, Joseph Razmik, Ben Harradine, Corey I. Marsh Sr., Capcom vs SNK, BXL Gotham, Ryan Dinched, Evan Balder, Philip Namph, Cambo Rambo 82, Azrael Rarakai, Keith Ferguson, Joaquin Varela, Prince Knight, Michael Cullix, Ego, Jordan Durant, Angel Light 85, Alethea Swanson, Nick Daniels, Princess Zana, Glennie Glenn, Daniel Daly, Computer Man, House of a Ted, Gary Pinkett, ECU Professor, Kid Anime, Justin Wang, Aaron McNamara, Hermes Gonzalez, Instant Gratification Monkey, Man Shovel, James Bishop, JB, Michael Hall, Wesley Sang Hee, Ben Dover, Langston Miller, New, Brian Barry, Sarah Powell, Vlamic Renee, Marvin Aaron Liga, Chris Cool, TOG Driver, Adrian Hannington, Bernard NG, Richard G. Stewart, James McDonald, Dan Van Dammit, Louis Viant, John Bates, David Bow, Chris Fisk, Mike Bruno, Rick67, Antonio Rodriguez, Craig Jenkins, Retroverse.com, Casey Wright, Synth Spaces, Zai, Andrew Bazanski, Gunther Hendricks, and everybody else who supports my platform online. Yeah! Cheerio.